friends, this is Trish and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we have a very special guest named Kelly, and she has been in education for over 10 years. But today she is going to tell us about an awful experience she had teaching middle schoolers. So Kelly, let's just go ahead and dive right in. Middle school has a reputation for being really difficult, but these kids were on another level. Can you tell us some of the behaviors you encountered?
Yes. So it was my second day, as in most places, they have like A and B days. So the second day, I had the first two classes I had were awful. Ended up sending kids to the office, kids cussing me out, ganging up on me. I started in the middle of the year, which I will never, ever do again. I've learned my lesson. But that started my only second day of teaching there, and it didn't get better from there.
Wow. So what went through your mind? Did you think like, oh, it's going to be okay, like I'm going to get over this, or was it like paralysis? What were you thinking when that happened?
I was thinking I want to quit right away, but we had some bills to pay. I also heard that if you quit mid-year, then you can never ever work in that county again. And I didn't want to close the doors. My husband had to talk with me, about how he's had bad things happen at work and he doesn't just quit. So my goal was just to get through that year, which I barely did.
I totally understand. The absolute worst year I ever had was when I jumped from teaching fourth grade up to seventh and eighth grade. And I think maybe due to like collective trauma, we just forget how like vicious middle school kids can be and how they just pick at things. And it's like, it's so difficult. So did you have the talk with your administrators, and what kind of advice did they give you?
I did. Like, they would try to give me advice, but it was things that never worked. It was things like build a relationship with the kids and all the behavior will go away, which I actually did try to do with one of the two classes. I had some girls, the girls that I sent to the office, they were upset. I let them come and eat lunch with me. I felt like we turned a corner and things were getting better. And then they wanted to have lunch with me every single day, which at first, again, I'm like, oh, good, a relationship. But it got old. I felt like I never got a break. Number one. Number two, I felt like it blurred the lines of the authority a little bit. And I just was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then they immediately started hating me again. So that's how fickle middle schoolers are. That's why that relationship advice is like horrible, because one minute they like you and all you have to do another minute is say no, and they hate you again. So, and I didn't want it to blur the lines of the authority. So, and I'd get other advice, hey, you need to do lunch detention, which I felt like was a punishment to me. Now I have to sit in the classroom with the kids and I can't get a break. Lunch was only 30 minutes or less by the time you took your kids down. So you don't get a break or call the parents, which I ended up emailing more because I would talk to other coworkers. I have another coworker that started the same day as me. We both started right after Christmas. And she would say, you expect it to be a 5-minute phone call and then it's like 45 minutes of a parent, defending their kid. So I would always start with email. But the times I did try to call, I would get things like, oh, well, you're the teacher there all day. I'm just the parent. What do you want me to do about it? It's like, well, considering in middle school, I have 160 kids, I want you to discipline your kid at home. I want you to back me up. Or, make excuses for their kid, say things like, oh, my daughter was never like this until she started middle school. Then I talked to someone who knew her in 5th grade and was like, no, she actually was like that last year. So it was hard. And just when they would gang up on you, you're one person. And when you have a crowd of them ganging up on you, that made it really, really hard. And then to have to go to the next class after that would just happen and smile and try to be there for those kids was really hard. And you weren't always at your best, So, I did try some of the things. And then they had after school detention, but that was always put on by the administrators. It wasn't up to me. So that also was hard to implement because you would email or call or try to talk to your administrators over and over. Like, this person is cussing me out every day when we go to lunch. I need her to get in trouble. And they want to get back to you. So it made it really, really hard.
Definitely. You brought up so many great points. And I would get really frustrated because a lot of times, especially with middle school kids, because I think I taught sixth grade for maybe about 5 years, it was as if the administration and the parents forgot that young people can be a little diabolical. They kind of figure out their power. And so I would have a lot of girls, especially, kind of taunting me. So I had a group of these girls that would basically stand outside of the door before class, and they would make sure that they were just barely late every day. Then each and every one of them would all ask to go to the bathroom, even though they had been standing outside hanging in front of the bathroom, which was like walking distance from my classroom. And they would just kind of play all these mind games. They would put their head down and intentionally fall asleep every day. They would roll their eyes. They would pretend like they didn't understand my questions. And it was just something that those kind of little behaviors can be really difficult to explain, because then the teacher sounds petty. And it's like, no, they're doing these things on purpose because they know that they can get away with it. And just trying to communicate that to parents and admin would be so hard, and it's so demoralizing because teachers just kind of feel powerless. It's like there's only so much that we can do. And since the blame always gets put back on us to build a relationship or make a connection or make your content more interesting, it just kind of feels like an uphill battle.
Definitely. I could relate a lot to that. I had a group of girls who also would do the same thing, would give me dirty looks when they would come in, and they would gang up together. And it felt like you were in middle school again, except I was supposed to be the teacher who had authority. And at one point, I observed someone's class because that was an option if you were a new teacher. So I thought, I'm going to show them that I'm trying. I observed somebody's class, and this teacher was amazing. She had that balance between the kids liking her and having authority. But two girls in her class that had me, they kept looking at me, giving me dirty looks and laughing, to the point where this teacher thought someone had like farted or something. And I told her after class what had happened, and she was ready to like deal with it. She wasn't going to take bullying of anyone, whether it was a teacher or a student. But then we tried to get the counselor involved, and we couldn't mesh up our schedules. And then this was towards the end of the year. So I think finally they got talked to one-on-one by this teacher, but it was like we could never have that conversation all together. But, you know, it's awful being treated like you're in middle school again. You forgot how bad it was, but here they are treating a teacher and authority figure that way.
Yeah, and I just think it feels kind of like a no-win situation, because I think kind of human nature is there's respect that comes with consequences. And I think as soon as they figure out that we're very limited in what we can do, it's like it becomes fun and it becomes a game. And I especially encountered that when I was teaching 7th and 8th graders. They would literally get into this routine where they would question every single thing that I would do. Well, why are we doing this? Well, why is the assignment this long? And sometimes it would be personal, like, why are you wearing that? Like, what's going on with your shoes? And it just seems like something so harmless, but it definitely gets old for sure.
It does. Actually, you said that. That was one thing that really just got to me when it would happen day after day, pretty much hour after hour, is the kids would gaslight you. You would literally see them doing the offense, and you would say to stop doing it, whatever it was, stop talking in class. I wasn't talking when you literally just saw them do it. And this happened all the time, to the point where you would just get tired of it. So one point I had a boy ask me, well, what did I do wrong? And I was so sick of kids asking this that I wouldn't answer. I'm like, you know what you did. I'm not going to answer, which I ended up then getting in trouble with. His mom called the principal. I got in trouble for that. I explained kids do this all day, every day. And eventually you get tired of answering these kinds of questions, because they were like, well, he has a right to know what he did wrong.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's wild teaching middle school. So I'm curious, how did these behaviors translate into academics? Because I just know for me, when they figured out they could misbehave, they definitely also figured out that they didn't have to try that hard or put in that much effort. So did you see that correlation?
Definitely. It was just hard to get them to be quiet, to listen to me. And then I tried different techniques. I was kind of hoping that, the consequences of maybe getting an F in the class would then motivate the parents to do something, which some of them it did, but others, they didn't care, because nowadays you can't fail kids. So they can fail a class and they're still going to be moved on to the next grade. So the parents also wouldn't care. I overheard a conversation where the kid's like, yeah, my parents said they didn't care about my grades till high school, because in high school it counts towards college. So as a middle school teacher, it was so hard to motivate kids. They know they can fail. They're still going to be passed on. Their own parents are telling them they don't even care about their grades. So it was really hard to motivate. And with 30 kids in a class, it was hard to keep all of them on task, especially you just needed a few in the class to act up, and it affected everybody. So yeah, that was very hard.
And so did you feel a lot of pressure from your admin to get grades up, or were they the kind of admin that just said, hey, whatever they get, they get?
If a parent would call and complain, they would always take the side of the parent. They'd be like, well, what happened here? Why? Blah, blah, blah. It must be your fault. So there definitely was the pressure. So yeah. I just felt like, okay, I don't know. It was so hard. You'd try to tell them, well, your kid hasn't done anything. I did have one parent that finally caught her child lying, because I told her she did not do the project. And she kept saying, well, she says she did it. I said, well, then ask her to see it. And she finally understood that her child was lying, but she still got passed on to the next grade.
Definitely. So I'm kind of curious, when you talked to your administrators, did you feel like they were giving you a lot of gaslighting too? Or did they have any kind of support for you at all?
When I first started, I felt like they did try to give me suggestions and try to help. But I quickly learned it was all talk when it came down to actually doing something. But the behaviors were so bad in our school that we had meetings about it. I guess so many teachers complained that it got the attention of the superintendent, who ended up coming to our school and saying, I want to hear what's going on. So I think this particular school was even worse than other middle schools in the county. And just from conversations I've seen online, definitely I think it's one of the worst. So he came and we had a lot of discussions. It'd be like weekly, and he'd say, I want to listen, I want to learn. And he even said, we have so many problems that we're dealing with that we can't get to all of these. We can't get to, we have to deal with the threats and the vaping before we deal with the more minor stuff. So they did try to tell us, like, they just have so many problems, they couldn't deal with them all. But I did feel like the administrators were catering to the parents, at some point, if it's public school, I'm sorry, but there are other options if you don't like it. I don't think we need to cater to the parents. It should be, these are the consequences. If your child did this, then they get in trouble. It shouldn't be catering to the parents. It's not private school where they could just take their money elsewhere. And they can take their kid and homeschool them. They can go to private school, so there are other options if you don't like it.
Definitely. So speaking of behavior, did you guys have like a building-wide program like BIST or PBIS, or did y'all have an official structure for discipline?
They tried to. So it was supposed to be first a warning, then a think sheet, which I found out pretty quickly those think sheets were absolutely useless. It was just like a kid would write down what they did wrong and think about it. And they didn't get any real consequence with that think sheet. So they all just thought it was a joke, or they'd write IDK on it. And then it was supposed to be lunch detention and call the parents, maybe call the parents first, then lunch detention, then in schools or out of school suspension, which again was hard to get because that required an administrator. So yeah. And then also for the after school detention, because a parent had to come pick the kid up, you had to get the parents' permission. And some of them just wouldn't even give permission for their kid to do the after school. So then your hands were tied. I had one parent who's like, I'm sorry, I can't. I just had a baby. Like, I get that, people have circumstances, but yeah, it just made it hard that our hands were tied to give any consequences.
Definitely. I think the hard thing about those canned consequences too was if you're in a really high behavior problem school, it is as if those things are happening every minute of the day. So I remember we called it BIST in my state, where they had the think sheet, safe seat, and then a buddy room if all of that wasn't working. And so they would essentially say, they would make it sound like it was going to be tough. They're like, if they even, breathe wrong, then boom, you give them a think sheet, and then boom, safe seat. But I'm like, the amount of talking and craziness that's going on, the entire class would be leaving to, go to a buddy room, and that's impossible. So I just found those systems hard. I think sometimes they're well-meaning, but it just doesn't end up working out.
Right. And one time I did give I found a way to give my own consequence. I got the strictest teacher in that grade and I said, can this student just come to your class the whole time? And she said yes. So this was toward the end of the year. So I was happy that she did this. This was one of the students that gave me, like the worst problems. And I told her after lunch, you're going to this teacher's class and you're going to stay in there the whole time. So, I tried to find ways to come up with other punishments since you had no control whatsoever of, the after school suspensions.
Definitely. So were other teachers starting to quit throughout the school year, or how were other teachers kind of dealing with the chaos?
Yes. So actually, the reason I started in the middle of the year is because the first teacher quit after 2 months, and then they had a long-term sub and then me, and the long-term sub ended up going to math. So he was still there at the school. And actually he was wonderful. He gave me a lot of advice since he had just had my class and did, let me vent sometimes. So he was great. But then there were teachers in all grade levels who were quitting mid-year or getting fired. There was so much of this happening. Where do I even begin? So there were teachers that would just up and quit. This happened in 7th grade and I taught 6th, but those students started purposely trying to get teachers fired. So there was one substitute teacher who took away a phone, but maybe she grabbed it out of the hand. And that's one of the rules. You're not supposed to have the phone. And then it was that student told their parents, she pushed them. They call 911 and this teacher I think you get suspended for 10 days while they're looking into it. And she was like, no, forget it. And then this would happen several times. There was one man who he made teacher of the year his first year. I didn't know him that well, but the few interactions I had with him, wonderful person, always offering help. A lot of kids and parents loved him. He ended up, same thing happened. A kid accused him of something. He got suspended while looking into it and he said, nope, I quit. And they lost a great teacher. And this kind of thing kept happening. So now the 7th graders are seeing, look what power we have. We can get teachers fired. So they would tell some of the teachers, we can get any teacher fired. If you do this, we'll get you fired. And they actually had a private firing list that was going around. I found out later I was on the list. So I think my principals started to recognize that this was happening because less and less people this was happening to them. But over the summer, actually just a week ago, I saw someone who used to be sub in that school and she said the same thing happened to her. A student accused her of calling him a racial slur name, which he didn't do. That student actually ended up admitting that he lied and made up the whole thing, but they still suspended her because a whole group of students were saying that she did it. Because, it's he said, she said. So if a whole group of students can come together and say, yes, this teacher said that, then they're going to have a lot of power. They knew this, so they were using this to their benefit.
It's that kind of brings back horrible flashbacks of my time teaching at private school. That's when I taught 7th and 8th grade. And I assumed that these kids were just really, really rich and, really snotty. But it's interesting that that's happening in public school too. But they did the exact same thing to me. I found out that my 3rd week into teaching, they had drawn up a petition to get me fired. And 2/3 of my students in one of the grades signed it. And they were making up vicious rumors about me all year long and spreading it on social media, spreading it to parents. And it was just so out of control. And I think it's so difficult. Once a culture like that is facilitated wherever it happens, it's so hard to figure out what to do. And I think it really involves parents putting their foot down and being wise about how kids are. But it's not only do administrators forget, it seems like parents forget. And it just seems like society is collectively in denial. So there's all these teachers that are crying out and saying, look, this is happening to us. And it's people just kind of want to plug their ears and say, oh, you must be the problem.
Exactly. So I actually thought that this place couldn't get any worse. But then I'm seeing from people I became Facebook friends with, from that school, complaining about things getting worse this year. So it sounds like things hadn't really, gotten better. And this, just a few months ago, there was a teacher who tried to break up a fight, and she ended up getting kicked in the head while students were on their phone, filming this. And so it ended up the kid that did this only got a 10-day suspension, should have been expelled. And if anybody did that to you on the street, you would not want to have to see that person again. So she didn't want to have to be in the same classroom as that student. And she was basically told, well, if you don't like it, you can quit, which is what she did. She was 26-year teacher. So it's not like she was new and didn't know what she was doing. And I don't know. I heard third party that she is now in an elementary school and happy, which I'm glad, because I first heard that her concussion was so bad she couldn't even go back. But that's awful. That is traumatic for anyone. And then here they are, filming it on their phone. Like, you hear of this stuff happening to kids, and that's awful enough. But they're doing this to a teacher who's supposed to be authority. Just terrible.
That is terrible. That reminds me of one student I had when I taught 6th grade, and he would literally throw desks, he would destroy bulletin boards, he would scream curse words, but they just wouldn't expel this kid. And I just think, in addition to all the problems that we're having as a society, it seems like school districts are so afraid of lawsuits. And so their automatic fear is just getting sued by parents, not protecting teachers, not even protecting other students. And so was violence a big problem in that school, or was it something that was just kind of occasional?
Well, in the 6th grade where I work, it was occasional, but from what I hear in the upper grades, it was something that happened all the time. And one time I had bathroom duty in the 7th grade hall, and there's such a difference in the height in 7th graders than 6th graders. And I truly felt, that was the first time I was like, wow, if I had to say something to one of these students and they threatened violence, I wouldn't be able to defend myself. So I truly felt threatened. And it's one of the reasons now I won't, work with kids that are much bigger than me, because teachers do have the threat of violence. And, middle and high school boys are just as big and strong as adults. So
definitely. So you've transitioned to a different role, and you've done all kind of things in education. You've taught online, you've taught at a private school, you've taught public. What has been your favorite teaching role in education so far?
That's a tough one. I really did enjoy teaching online because you got to teach whatever you wanted when I was at this one marketplace. But as far as a full-time job, now I'm teaching special ed preschool in a totally different county school. I left all of that behind, or I wouldn't be speaking about it. But I am really enjoying that. I work with the little kids, and they're sweet and cute, and I get to work with them more one-on-one or in small group settings, which I like a lot better than a big class of 30 students.
That's awesome. So do you think that that's something you're going to stick with for a while?
I do, actually. I'm going to stick with that.
That's really encouraging to hear, because I kind of taught every grade between 4th grade and 8th grade, but I never taught really little kids. And I've had a few teachers that taught the middle school kids that said, oh my gosh, if you go 2nd grade and under, like, you're going to be living your dream. But eventually I just kind of burnt out and thought, I'm done with teaching. But if I ever went back, I would kind of consider teaching the little ones. That might be an interesting experience.
Definitely.
So what kind of advice would you have for a teacher that was in your position that year? And if you had to go back and tell yourself some kind of advice, what would you do to kind of encourage yourself back when you were in that awful experience?
That's a tough one, because I didn't even know what to tell myself, let alone somebody else. But I think if I could go back before I even got that job, I would say, don't do it. Don't start in the middle of the year. Don't start at this school. Don't even do it, would be my advice.
And what would you tell somebody that feels like they're just being gaslighted constantly, and they're being told either, oh, it's not that bad, or it's your fault? How would you encourage that person?
Do your best to get through the school year and then try a different school. I heard that this particular school had a reputation even amongst my county. You could have gone to a different middle school, wouldn't have been as bad. Or if you're able to, try a totally different type of teaching position like I am. I talked to some of my coworkers who were like, well, I'm only certified to teach this. So one thing I would actually give to someone who's going to school for teaching is substitute teach, because you can try substitute teaching for all different age groups and schools. And, it depends on the county and the state, but some substitute jobs, all you need is a high school diploma. So you could start subbing before, you get out of college or even right out of high school. And most colleges get out before, public school, at least a few weeks. So you could spend those few weeks subbing and really decide before you get certified in only middle school social studies. Make sure that's really what you want to do.
So I'm just kind of curious if you could go back and give that school that you worked at any kind of advice about maybe something they could fix or something that wasn't quite right, what would you tell them?
Well, one thing that they did is that the ladies who worked in the front office ended up being like the administrators. So when you would call and need a kid removed from your class, they were the ones that was supposed to come and take the kids out. Well, that was never supposed to be their job in the first place. And I know that some of them even started like not answering the phone or saying, we're busy, we can't come. And I think we were all put in a tough situation, and they had a job to do, which was supposed to be the front office, answering phones, bringing people in. And they would have things happen like maybe a kid would come and sit in the front office and start cursing when a parent would come in to pick up their kids. So I think it was pretty awful that the admins put it on them and put them in a bad situation that they weren't supposed to be in.
Wow, so that almost sounds like the front desk people were like security guards or bouncers. Is that kind of what happens?
Right, without the pay of it, And they were, middle-aged ladies, so they did not like a bouncer's usually a strong guy that could stop someone from coming in,
That is crazy. Well, I congratulate you for just finishing that crazy role. And I'm sure that that's a relief that that's behind you. And I'm glad to hear that you have found something in teaching that you love. And so I'm curious if anybody wants to ask you questions or find you online, is there anywhere they could do that?
Yes, I have a YouTube channel for teachers called TeacherKellyTag. So I do all things teaching on that channel.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Miss Kelly. And audience, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or any suggestions for future video topics, let us know in the comments. If you want to interview with me, you can go ahead and email me at teachertherapytrish@gmail.com. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye for now, everybody.
Bye.